It's strange. You hear stories about podcasts, and it seems like the most awful thing, the most viscerally appalling thing the Radch have done. This, to invade and take what, half the adult population? And turn them into talking corpses, slaved to your ship's microphones? Turned against their own people? If you'd asked me before you annexed us, I'd have said it was a fate worse than death. Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a bit about ourselves along the way. My name's Abu, and joining me on this annexation is my co-host Obsa.
Welcome.
Obsa, we are getting into our next book on the podcast today. How exciting!
Yeah, this is an awesome book for us to be continuing our journey with.
That's right. Ancillary Justice by Leckie. I can't wait to dive in. This has been such an interesting read so far. But before we do, as always, Obsa, we got to take care of some housekeeping up top.
So today's discussion will contain spoilers for the first 8 chapters of the book. So make sure you've done the reading before you continue listening.
That's right.
We certainly encourage you to read along with us and share your thoughts. So please email us at sci-fi-book-club-pod@lordparty.com. Join the Patreon at that same handle, patreon.com/sci-fi-book-club-pod. You'll notice we've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, and all sorts of bloopers on Patreon. So you'll definitely want to catch those. And you'll also find our Discord, where we keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going with all of the other readers in the community.
Mm-hmm. And all of those links are going to be in the show notes for your convenience.
Indeed.
Now, here's the game plan for today's episode. We will begin by summarizing these first 8 chapters of Ancillary Justice, sharing our first impressions so far, and perhaps some predictions of what we think is to come. Then we will dive into our sci-fi analysis, dig a little bit into Leckie's background as the author of this story, and then break down some of the big themes and ideas of this book. Now, one quick note that we wanted to say up top in this episode.
This is a tough one.
This is tough. You are going to notice the audio quality of the rest of this episode is a little bit rough. In full transparency, Ancillary Justice was literally the first book and the first episodes Obsa and I ever recorded together.
Several months ago at this point.
Several months ago. And because of production reasons, we swapped things around and actually decided to launch with 3 Body first. So that having been said, you're about to hear some rough audio. It's not the worst, but it's certainly not the high quality audio that we have now. So apologies, please bear with us. The discussion itself we loved, and the book we loved, so we really hope you enjoy this one. Now, before we get into all of that, let's take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, dear listener, because when we come back, we're going to dive into Ancillary Justice. We will see you in a minute.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Welcome back, folks. So let's start with a summary of the chapters we read in this book, Obsa. And we're going to breeze through this pretty quickly. It's a very dense 8 chapters to begin with, but basically there are 2 parallel stories being told. The first is with Breck, as she searches for this high-tech gun on the planet Nilt. And the second story that's interposed between that is with the AI-1 as they support Lieutenant On planet Shyserna after the annexation. So for this summary, I figured we would just take it one story at a time and summarize the events of each.
All right, so let's start with Nilt. On Nilt, the former ship AI Breck rescues a beaten and extremely high officer she recognizes from 1,000 years ago named Sayvarden. Breck manages to catch up Sayvarden and rent a flyer out to where she believes Strigan is hiding out after a Wild West showdown with the Hertz manager, which was really
honestly my experience with Hertz as well. Most of the time.
99% of the time, there is a shootout in which you deadlock every single other customer. But it's clear to us throughout these opening chapters that Breck is an outsider on Nilt because people see her as Radch. She's constantly being overcharged and harassed by the locals. But at Strigan's abandoned hideout, we learn more about Sayvarden's past as a former lieutenant on Breck's ship, Justice of Torin, and how Breck disliked her because Sayvarden was a privileged Nepo baby from a powerful Radch family. And events eventually come to a head when Strigan herself shows up and Breck reveals that she has spent the last 19 years tracking down the high-tech gun from the genocide of Garced that Strigan has.
Right. When's the last time you spent 19 years on a single goal, Obsa?
You know, it's been about 19 years, I think.
I suppose I spent 18 years graduating grade school. So I'm going to count that.
About a decade ago, to be fair. But there's a lot of questions just out of this Nilt story. Why does Breck want the gun? It sounds like to kill the Lord of the Radkai, which is iconic.
Hello.
But why don't you tell us about the parallel story, the other kind of track that we're following?
Yes. So in between all of those adventures on Nilt, we have this parallel story where we are following 1ESC as they support Lieutenant On through the political turmoil, which is a bit of an understatement, but the political turmoil in Ors after the bloody annexation on planet Sheserna. And here in this story, we get a sense of what Breck's former life was like as a ship AI controlling dozens of these quote-unquote corpse soldiers, these ancillary bodies all at once. And I found this to be really interesting reading because almost paragraph to paragraph, it jumps from location to location as we jump from one ancillary body's perspective to the others. It's a really cool bit of writing.
Completely agreed.
Now, Ors is currently in the midst of a simmering class war between the wealthy and influential Tan Mind who live in the upper city and the poor minority called the Orsians who are located in the lower city where Lieutenant On and 1ESC are headquartered. As the story goes, the richest woman in the upper city, named Jen Shinan, feels that the Radch are giving unfair preference to the lowly Orsians, people that she doesn't even consider human. She looks so down on them, they're not people to her. And so Jen Shinan cooks up this wild plot involving these banned weapons and an orphaned family niece, all in order to frame the Orsians of treachery, to come up with an excuse to go down there and, frankly, to slaughter Orsians. Now, Lieutenant On and 1ESC realize that this plot goes all the way to the top of the Radch military, because where the fuck do these weapons come from? And as we get closer to Chapter 8, we realize that, oh my goodness, the literal fucking Lord of the Radch herself might be involved with Jen Shinan and might have played a part in this treachery, in this conspiracy.
Honestly, so puzzling. That's something I know wild. We have to unpack, but it is so bizarre that the Lord of this empire is down in the dirt, in the weeds, with the Tan Mind for essentially scheming up this plot.
And to what end? I still have questions. I don't know. Now, all of this culminates in Chapter 8, in our final chapter in today's reading, in an absolutely horrific scene. I read this on a plane, and I don't know if just like being 30,000 feet up in the air made me more emotional, or if this is just a highly intense and emotional chapter, but we have this horrific scene that takes place in the Temple of Ikt, where Anandar Mainai, the Lord of the Radch herself, orders Lieutenant On to slaughter the dozens of Tan Mind who have stormed the lower city, including Jen Shinan herself. And against her better judgment, against her will to do so, Lieutenant On does that, and 1ESC opens fire on these people. killing all of them. And that's where chapter 8 ends.
Yeah. And I mean, you described it perfectly. It is horrific, whether you're 40,000 feet up or on planet Earth.
Yeah.
But it's also par and course for the Radch. Even the annexation, I think at one point they described Shoshurna as having around 6,600 people, which was further cut down by the annexation. So a tiny populace, but still the Radch cannot help but enact these sorts of horrific massacres as part of their colonizing efforts.
Right. Big evil empire, annexation. People are going to die.
People are going to die.
I know we're going to get into our impressions, but I loved how throughout these chapters, 1-esque is casually like, yeah, I shot some people, maybe.
Right. On the other hand, though, I will say that 1-esque, more than at least some of the human soldiers that we come to learn about over the course of the 8 chapters, seems to feel a little more remorse, or at least kind of hesitancy than, say, Lieutenant Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we're already sort of sharing our thoughts, but let's officially get into it. Let's talk about our impressions of these first 8 chapters and any predictions we may have for what's to come. What do you think, Obsa?
Well, I cannot underscore how much I'm loving this book. I think it's so original, so layered and complex, and just brilliantly laid out without being, inscrutable. Like there's a level of complexity that you can kind of lose yourself in. And I think in the case of this book, it's just such a compelling, gripping story told over these 2 parallel timelines that all around just makes for a really fun read. So much I want to really explore and unpack. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be having the conversation.
I'm very much in the same boat as you. I am loving this book so far. You and I have read and reread, and in your case, reread again these first 8 chapters. The dedication, I love it. And I am anxious to get to chapter 9, 10, 11. Like, I just want to know what happens next. And that to me is a good sign. That's a sign that I'm enjoying the story. I'm loving these characters, and I'm desperate to know what's going on and to unpack more of these mysteries. I will say the opening chapters are a bit slow. I don't know if you got this sense, but it's a bit of a slow burn.
A little bit of a build-up.
Yeah, exactly. We're building up the mysteries. I think in particular what takes place in Oars with Lieutenant On is kind of like a murder mystery slow unpacking of the plot. And so I found some of those chapters to go a little long. But overall, I'm loving the universe this book has created. And to your point, I'm loving how much it is tackling. In just the first 8 chapters, we've already touched on huge topics like class, privilege, imperialism, gender, artificial intelligence. All of these huge topics are already mixed all throughout these first 8 chapters as we get to know these characters. I did want to call out a quote that I loved in particular. You brought up Lieutenant Skiat earlier, one of Lieutenant On's allies on Shoshurna. And Lieutenant Skiat, she has a quote that I absolutely love. She says, quote, "Here's the truth. Luxury always comes at someone else's expense. One of the many advantages of civilization is that one doesn't generally have to see that if one doesn't wish. You're free to enjoy its benefits without troubling your conscience." End quote. And I read that line and I had to take a moment.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, damn. Yeah. Really saying the quiet part out loud, right? Because so much of civilization is very much based on this privileged, not privileged worldview.
Yeah.
And Lieutenant Skiat is just kind of like, bro, like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And to be fair, in this scene, Lieutenant Skiat's very much being kind of cavalier about it and just being like, it is what it is, what are you going to do? And Lieutenant On's like, well, maybe we could do something.
Yeah, I totally agree, though. Her level of, I think, comfort is probably the best way to describe it, with this hierarchy and this nature of culture and society in which you really are subject to fate, which is particularly weighted in the mythology of the Radch.
Yeah.
But there is an element of kind of determinism to it, in which this is how things are because Amat wills it.
The Lord willed it.
The Lord wills it. Who are we?
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? It was quite a compelling line.
Yeah. And it's topics like this that the book is tackling so head on that's adding to my enjoyment. This is why I'm enjoying the book so much. There's also some really unique parts, which we'll talk about a little bit later in our discussion, but the book handles gender in a very unique way, and it really ties into the culture of not just the Radch, but the other cultures we see on the different planets as well. You're going to talk about this later. I love in that one scene where 1-esque makes it clear that the AI has feelings.
Right.
Because how the fuck would an AI operate if logic was the only thing it could do?
Right.
And that kind of blew my mind because I was like, that makes so much sense. Why aren't we talking about this?
Yeah.
So I'm excited to unpack that more with you.
Yeah.
A lot of big ideas, a lot that we're going to unpack in our analysis. Let's take a quick breather, Opsa, and toss to another ad break. But don't go anywhere, dear listener, because when we come back, we're getting into the nitty gritty. We've teased out some of these ideas already, but when we're back, we're going to dive into our sci-fi analysis and talk about some of the big ideas in this book.
Welcome back, folks. Now we'll dig into our sci-fi analysis, the meta, the dilemma, the leap, all of it unpacked for you. So let's start with the meta. Let's talk about why we chose this book, what we know about Ann Leckie, and anything else we can kind of explore there.
Let's do it. This was a lot of fun, actually. I went down a rabbit hole of Ann Leckie research to learn a little bit more about her. This book has achieved something that no other science fiction book has before. It has won the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Arthur C. Clarke Award.
Honestly, so impressive.
So impressive.
No other book has done this.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And what is the icing on the top of this cake, on this very prestigious cake, is that Ann Leckie literally sci-fi EGOTed with her debut novel. This was her first book.
First book and 2013. Like, this is a decade old now, and it feels super contemporary. And obviously, in the nature of speculative fiction, it's predicting some things that, and we'll talk about this later, but that we're kind of experiencing at the moment with the rise of AI that's kind of readily available to us.
Yeah, totally. It feels like a book that could have come out last year. And to learn that it's a decade old was actually kind of astonishing for me. Now, the critical reception of the book was fairly good. It had a positive reception when it was released back in 2013. In The Guardian's review, for example, Eric Brown wrote that Ancillary Justice, quote, succeeds brilliantly in telling a fast-paced, moving, and intellectually satisfying story of love and vengeance, end quote. Love me some Love and Vengeance. Meanwhile, Nina Allen's review in ARC was a little bit more critical of the book. Nina wrote, quote, the ideas contained in Ancillary Justice seem disappointingly simple. Empires are evil. Class systems are oppressive. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. End quote.
A little harsh, if true. I think it's that a lot of the motifs are fairly timeless. Most empires are evil, and class systems are oppressive. So it's
who would have known?
She's a little on the nose with that review, but I think it's understandable how you might reach that conclusion.
Totally.
So we also know that Ann Leckie was born in 1966 in Toledo, Ohio, literally where Abu grew up.
I've heard of that place. That's funny.
Equally as massive a fan of science fiction since childhood. Right. We might be slightly bigger fans, but gotta give it to her. She did EGOT, and we have not done EGOT, yes. Yeah. But before skyrocketing to science fiction and author stardom, she was a bored stay-at-home mom in St. Louis who failed for years to have anything published. Mm-hmm. And it was only in 2005 when she was accepted to the prestigious Clarion West Writers Workshop and studied under the literal legend Octavia Butler.
Hello!
That the ideas for what would eventually become Ancillary Justice formed, and over 6 years she produced this magnificent work.
Wow, that is very interesting to learn a bit more about Ann Leckie's origin story. Not only is there the very cool Toledo, Ohio connection, but it turns out if you are simply within Octavia Butler's aura, you will EGOT.
Yes, apparently.
So now I have to find a way to be in the same room as Octavia Butler.
If I could just carry her cape, that's all I care for. That's all I ask.
All right, well, let's move on to our next segment. Now that we understand some of the meta, some of what went into this book, let's break down the big ideas, starting with our first segment, the dilemma.
Uh-huh.
What do you think, Opsa, is the central dilemma of this book?
A great question. In the first third, you're confronted with at least a few candidates. But for me, it's the ever-present and titular question of the Ancillary.
Oh, okay.
Their existence is a curious one. They have emotions. They're this kind of odd human-machine hybrid, kind of like the Borg. They've got a hive mind. But again, they've got emotions. So it's somewhat puzzling. And as I mentioned before, Anna had enacted some, reforms wherein we're no longer making Ancillary.
Right.
But the story is told from the perspective of one. And from all accounts, there are tens of thousands of these amongst the various justices, the various troop carriers of the Radch.
Yeah.
That makes for some really fascinating attention-bending writing. And you called out this passage earlier, but it absolutely arrested me. The exchange between the Justice of Torin Ancillary 1-esque and a human soldier from another unit, where the human soldier calls out, yes, ships have feelings, and the Ancillary responds, yes, of course. Without feelings, insignificant decisions become excruciating attempts to compare endless arrays of inconsequential things. It's just easier to handle those with emotions. And that, for any number of reasons, really just was a gut punch for me. It's funny. I had been reading the transcript of a debate earlier this year in which Jan LeCun made a very similar point. March of this year, that emotions are necessary for autonomous intelligence.
Yeah.
Jan, for those who may not know, is known as one of the godfathers of modern AI, having pioneered a lot of foundational work on deep learning and recurrent neural networks. And this question of AI emotions and sensory grounding is just super contemporary and relevant. And you add to this the Ancillary's participation in these horrifying acts of brutality in service of the Radch, and you're caught in this really gripping presentation of what's ultimately the timeless question of autonomy or free will and moral culpability.
Wow. First of all, I love that you spend your free time reading transcripts of deeply dense academic debates.
Fair.
But no, I am really glad you brought that up, because this idea stuck with me. This idea, I was like, oh my gosh, this is changing the way I think about artificial intelligence. And remember, this book was written a decade ago, before we were having these very open conversations about AI that are in the public sphere now in 2023.
Yeah.
This changed my perspective, because when you think about it, a lot of day-to-day decisions are just handled by like emotion or feeling or instinct, right?
Right.
When I choose to wake up may or may not have to do with my alarm, but mostly has to do with how I feel and when I feel ready to wake up, right?
Right.
That sort of day-to-day decision making, we make thousands of decisions every day. If I had to stop and think through every logical what-if scenario,
you would never get out of bed.
I'd never get out of bed. Like, I think that's the point that 1-esque is making here, is you can't have an artificial logic its way through every problem, because it'll never finish the first problem. There's too much logic. Emotions are a much more convenient and faster way to take care of the little stuff, and then you logic the more complex stuff.
Right. It makes you reflect on our humanity as well. There's the question of, we think of emotions in the scope of the Ancillary as a kind of heuristic for problem solving, but that's certainly, I'm sure, not how we think about emotions in our day-to-day lives and the role that intuition plays or tacit knowledge, but it does make you reflect a little bit. So for me, the question of the Ancillary is absolutely one of the key dilemmas.
So I went a slightly different route, because for me, when I thought about the key dilemma of the book, I couldn't help but think of the Raja Empire, literally the imperialistic superpower that's out here mass murdering people,
Yeah.
right? And when I zoomed out, I realized our cast of characters almost fit this mold of the types of people we see in these sorts of imperialistic societies, right? If you look at Savardin, for example, Savardin is your discarded veteran suffering from PTSD. Unfortunately, a classic stereotype that we see in empires throughout history. And Savardin has, at this point, when we meet him, been abandoned not only by state, but also by family, because his wealthy family has gone the way of the dinosaurs 1,000 years later. We also sort of see him as this other archetype where he is this rich Nepo baby who has then had his support system ripped away from him, and he's getting to see perhaps how the other side has always lived, and he's not a fan. It's really utterly destroying him to have to not rely on wealth and power and family name.
Yeah.
And as we see, he's resorted to literal drugs and being high all the time to strip away the emotion and the trauma he's experienced. Lieutenant On the other hand, fits this other archetype where she is almost our like sort of main character protagonist. I know Breck is technically our main character, but Lieutenant On is this like lower class wonder kid who dared to step foot in a social strata that never welcomed her, right? She doesn't come from a wealthy, rich, powerful family with a lot of clients like Savardin.
Mm-hmm.
She has almost worked her way up, and thus she questions the system more than someone like Lieutenant Skiat, who also came from a rich family. And it's just kind of like, this is how it is. Some people are rich and some people are poor.
Yeah.
What can we do about it?
Yeah.
And Lieutenant On's like, well, I don't know. Like, I kind of used to be not in this position of power, and now I am, so I have better perspective than you do.
Right. It's also interesting that at times she has to kind of catch herself because her accent starts to slip. And I noticed that a number of times where it was like, there are tells, and obviously we know that to be true in modern life as well. There are tells of your social class.
Absolutely. You never truly shed the social class you were born into. If you were born into a wealthy family, you will kind of always be like, oh, where do you ski? You know? And if you're born into like a middle class family like myself, you're always going to eat Taco Bell because it's comfort food.
That's
and
right.
Like, that's just how it is. And you're absolutely correct. The accent that Lieutenant On has to keep in check is very interesting. She has to hide that part of herself because that's not the social status she's in now.
Right.
The other characters, to quickly go over them, Breck, of course, is this former believer of the Radch Empire, right? An AI that has worked for the Radch for thousands of years. But we see that Breck has become disenchanted with the Empire and is now literally on a mission to kill the Lord of the Rajai. And then on the flip side, almost the opposite of Breck, is Strigan, who has always clearly been this cynical outsider, looks at the Rajai Empire and is like, wow, that's fucking awful. You're brainwashing your people. You're imperialistic. You're out here committing genocide. No, thank you. But Strigan herself has been wrapped up in the Radch Empire's baggage because she has now ended up with this high-tech gun from the Garsadai. So for me, to sort of zoom out, through the lens of these characters, I think the Radch Empire presents the major dilemma at the core of this book, because it's fascinating to see the countless ways that an unchecked superpower can suck everyone and everything into its gravitational orbit, whether you're a willing participant or not, right?
Absolutely.
There's always this idea that if you don't want to be a part of it, just move somewhere else, go somewhere else, do something, this, that. And the reality is, once there is a superpower at the level of something like the Radch Empire, or at the level of something like, the United States, you cannot help but be a participant of whatever that state does.
You're kind of caught in the gravitational wake of these massive forces. Yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely, whether you're a participant or not. And Strigan is such a clear example of that. Strigan wanted nothing to do with any of this, and now she's literally at the center of it and running for her life because of it.
Yeah.
So for me, that's where the main dilemma of the book so far comes in, right? That may evolve as we get into the second, third, and the final act of the book. But so far, the Radch seems like the big bad here.
Yeah, agreed. That maybe takes us into a little bit of the leap of faith that Leckie asks of us in kind of exploring this universe of the Radch and the Ancillary.
Right.
So One question I had, and I kind of doubt the book will answer it, is whether or not the Radch and the human societies we encounter are in any way descendants of Earth. I would love to catch just the tiniest nod to that question, given the parallels that we see with Earth civilizations.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Setting that aside, there is this colonizing, hierarchical, somewhat to highly corrupt society that is ruled by a dictatorial leader bent on the domination and subjugation of vast numbers of people through force and terror. So yeah, I buy that. I don't think that's the biggest leap. That to me is nonfiction. That a leap, not so much. I fully buy that. So the Radch to me feel completely plausible. Do I buy that someday people somewhere might decide, either personally or on behalf of others, to meld organic and synthetic hardware and software for reasons? Yeah, I mean, the singularity is obviously a highly present topic in the present day. You don't have to look much further than the Neuralink, and there are troubling stories about their testing on macaques and monkeys, but it's contemporary. And what's remarkable again is that, and Leckie wrote this in 2013, and
lest you forget,
this was a decade ago. And yeah, do I believe that religion and shared social myths will be ever present in, say, our planet's future? Again, yeah. So I find myself reading the basic premises of the book as believable, plausible, and highly contemporary. And in that regard, for me, it's less speculative than just slightly fast-forwarded fiction.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Everything you pointed out, I was like, yep, could happen, definitely happened, has happened, is happening,
check,
et cetera, like check down the list. One thing that you didn't bring up that I also want to call out is the way this book handles gender.
Absolutely.
We mentioned it earlier, but I think this is one other leap that the book is asking of the reader. It's asking the reader to step into this world where gender and the gender binary is almost non-existent. And I think this was one of the most unique parts of this book. And it's something that, as I was doing my research on Ann Leckie, I found out that she was adamant about never changing, despite getting pushback from many publishers and editors to do so, to simplify the genders and just do he, her. She refused. She wanted this to be a core part of the book, which I respect so much.
Absolutely.
And to dig into it a bit further, many of the characters throughout the book are described as androgynous, or at the very least, to be dressed in a way that makes it difficult for Breck to figure out which pronoun to use, right? Breck is just used to using she for everything because Radch culture has abandoned pronoun distinctions altogether.
Right.
They refer to every citizen as she by default. And so Breck, when she is in a different culture like Nilt, has to sort of play this guessing game. And it's interesting that even on a culture like Nilt, where they still have pronoun distinctions, the people are androgynous in a way that it actually confuses Breck even more.
Right.
Because she doesn't know which one to use. And a couple of times in these first 8 chapters, she uses the wrong one and has to be like awkwardly corrected.
Yeah.
I think this was a very cool subversion of gender, right? Not only in making she the default, because as we know, we live in a patriarchal society. He is the default for many characters throughout history. Not only in making that the default pronoun to go with for the Radch culture, but also how, again, we keep repeating this idea, but how ahead of its time it feels in 2013, right? Because discussions around pronouns, I don't think really became commonplace until the last couple of years. Certainly not in 2013. I was not joining work meetings in 2013 asking people their pronouns like I do now.
Yeah.
And so for this book to be tackling this idea a decade before it's commonplace is incredible.
Really quite insightful.
Definitely. I don't know how you felt about it, but for me, this was actually a very eye-opening experience as well, because in the first couple of chapters, I found myself like really confused, and I was having a hard time picturing these characters. I was like, he, her, him, like we just used 3 different pronouns for the same character. What's going on? Until I kind of let go of that and came to this realization that like It literally doesn't matter, though.
Yeah.
Syvarden is still the same character.
Still the Nepo baby. Still the drug
Still
addict.
that Nepo fucking baby. Right. Nepo babies can be any fucking gender they want.
As it
Doesn't make
turns
them
out.
not Nepo babies.
Yeah.
And for me, it was very enlightening to have that experience in real time, reading the book for the first time, to realize, oh, it doesn't matter.
Right.
We can call this character by whatever pronoun we want, and Undermine Eye is still up to some shit.
Exactly.
So for me, this was a very interesting leap that Ann Leckie has asked her readers to make. And I, for one, may have been resistant to making that leap the first time around in the first couple of chapters, but now I love it.
Yeah.
I wish more books would follow Ann Leckie's lead in this.
Yeah.
Because in so many cases, the gender of a character doesn't matter.
It's completely irrelevant.
So it's an interesting leap. And whether or not our culture will abandon gender distinctions like the Radch have done is a bit more of a complicated question. But I certainly do feel like we could live in a world in which that happens.
I think it's an interesting thing to find yourself almost commending the Radch on having achieved this
shit.
But it's true. It's interesting because as a leap, it doesn't feel like a gimmick or that it's a mere kind of plot device. It really doesn't show up in the plot so much. It's really just part of the fabric of this universe. And Leckie does an absolutely masterful job of kind of situating you in it and making you kind of come to terms with and accept, and in your case and mine, I think, embracing it. So I agree. Really wonderful storytelling in that regard.
Definitely. So to round out our discussion today, let's talk about our final segment. It's a sci-fi book, OPSA. So that means there's cool gadgets. There's cool tech.
We got to talk about the doodads.
We got to talk about it. There's plenty on display in this book. So I'm curious, which parts of the technology in this book really stood out to you? Which were believable and which were cool, and which do you want to use in real life?
Well, we've talked a lot about AI, the Ancillary, at the core of the novel. I don't want to make it seem like a foregone conclusion, but at least I believe that some version of an AI that behaves somewhat like the Ancillary is plausible. Am I interested in their existence or seeing that made manifest? No, I don't think so. I'm not one to lean into the singularity as much as some, I think. And the description of their existence to me seems more pitiable than something to look forward to.
Definitely.
I think AI, interesting, obviously quite present in our lives today between Siri, Alexa, and the various LLMs, OpenAI and ChatGPT and all of these things. But I think Ancillary, as they're presented, not something that I want to see made manifest.
Fair.
I also think it's worth talking about Kef a little bit. I mean, not exactly a doodad or tech, but such a fascinating drug, I think, in light of the emotive nature of the Ancillary AIs. And the basic promise of Kef is emotions out of the way, supreme rationality will result. Utter logic, true enlightenment.
Yeah.
But of course, it doesn't quite work that way, does it? I found that to be a really curious parallel between the AI, who by necessity have emotions and are highly effective as soldiers for the Radch, and those born to even high stature, even the highborn, like Syvarden, who seek to escape emotion in order to achieve some form of enlightenment and utter logic, as it's described.
This is a really poignant observation, OPSA. I want to commend you for this, because this went completely above my head. In multiple read-throughs of these chapters, I didn't make the Kef emotion, AI emotion connection. And now that you pointed out, I'm a little blown away. Syvarden is trying to strip away his emotions so that he can exist with his trauma. And Juanesque is making it clear that the AI simply couldn't exist without its emotion.
Right.
It wouldn't operate correctly.
Right.
An interesting inversion of that dynamic and that central question.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool.
And there's, of course, the standard hit list of gadgets that we see
Yeah.
in almost all speculative fiction. So there's the hypothermic kits and correctives. There's some limb regeneration at one point.
Hell yeah.
We've got personal aircraft for non-pilots. We've got force shields and life extension tech and population-wide trackers and clones that can somehow communicate over vast distances with one another, but are
so cool.
somehow independent. Really, I think, kind of an excellent backdrop to this larger story presented here.
Yeah, we really run the gamut of sci-fi.
Absolutely. What stood out to you?
For me, it was the ancillaries, the titular ancillaries that really stood out, because just this concept of an AI controlling thousands, potentially thousands of bodies that are taken from conquered planets, right, is very unique. It's not something I've come across in other speculative fiction, and it's truly horrifying to think about. You're like, are these people alive still, though?
Right.
Like, how are we reanimating their bodies and using them again? These corpse soldiers, are they fully dead, or are they stuck in some sort of horrifying semi-conscious state where they can't control their bodies because the AI is doing it?
Right.
I have a lot of questions about how this works. I also have a lot of questions about the ethics of how this works, because it feels very murky and it straight up feels like it's crossing a lot of lines. I also think it's very fascinating that the lore of the Radch is basically made immortal thanks to this technology.
Right.
The Lord of the Radch, Anandar Mainai, that son of a bitch, has 1,000 bodies and shows up at every annexation and can be 1,000 places at once in the Empire. The scale of this is awe-inspiring, but also the reality of, oh, this dude is immortal and can rule this empire forever.
And so far it's been 3,000 years, if I recall.
Right. Somewhere in the ballpark of 3,000 years of Joe Biden.
Sleepy Lord Radch.
Wow, can you imagine? It also makes Breck's mission very interesting, right? Because how is Breck going to kill 1,000 bodies of Anandar Mainai? What's the point of just killing one? It leads to a lot of interesting questions, and it makes the mission all that more complicated.
Yeah.
And I am really interested to see whether this high-tech gun is capable of killing 1,000 ancillary bodies in one blow. Maybe it is. We'll have to find out. But I think you covered the rest of it. Like, the book is chock full of the usual sci-fi stuff: extended lifespans, limb regeneration, force shields, aliens with high-tech weapons. All of that we've experienced in lots of science fiction before. All of that is present here and handled well. I will say, when it comes to this technology, the thing that I enjoy a lot about the way Ann Leckie has handled it is, outside of the titular ancillaries themselves, all of this tech really takes a backseat.
Absolutely.
It's the larger themes of the story that are front and center. The tech is just world building. Savardin needs to use one of those fucking insta-heal packets or whatever.
Right.
Great, use it. You know, it's not a central part of the narrative, and it's not the thing that Ann Leckie is focusing on in this story. So I appreciate the subtlety and the restraint that Ann Leckie has shown, because a lot of sci-fi does tend to lean into the technology.
Oh, absolutely.
And here it is simply good world building,
right,
rather than narrative convenience, which a lot of tech and a lot of sci-fi becomes.
I mean, even in the case of ultimately this thing that Breck has been searching for nearly 2 decades, this mystical weapon that's
the Glock
that cannot be detected by any X-ray machine. Like, it's still so background. You know, it's kind of the subject of this quest of Breck's, but the actual nature of the gun isn't that important. The key thing is just that it can't be apparently detected by their intrusion systems. So it's basically a 3D printed gun that cannot be detected by an X-ray. And that's all it is, you know, and you kind of move on from that point.
Totally. And I'm sure we'll actually come to learn more about the Preskar as well, this alien race that the Radch Empire has cut a deal with.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it much, but it appears that the Preskar were the ones to give the Garsadai these guns, and their motivations are also unclear. Like, why is it that they apparently can dominate the Radch, like, from all intents and purposes, like, are knowledge of them is that they essentially don't care who they encounter, that most humans are essentially their playthings or ignored.
Yeah.
So why this like backdoor deal with the Garcedae and then a front door deal with the Radch?
Hello.
So a little puzzling what their motivations are as well.
Totally. And I can't wait to learn more about it. I think there's much more going on here that meets the eye. And we'll just have to find out in future chapters. Well, Obsa, that wraps up our discussion of these first 8 chapters. What an exciting story thus far, and I can't wait to get into the rest of it. But as always, dear listener, we got homework for you.
Indeed.
For the next episode, make sure that you've read through chapter 16 of Ancillary Justice. And of course, you can always check out the entire season's reading schedule linked in the show notes below, so you can always stay on top of the reading for every single episode.
Well, friends, without feelings, insignificant decisions become excruciating attempts to compare endless arrays of inconsequential things. It's just easier to share your love and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, listening to this podcast leaves emotions out of the way, resulting in supreme rationality and true enlightenment. So very quickly, to round out the episode here, Obsa, I'm curious on the pronunciation of these names. We both listened to the audiobook, so we do have the advantage of knowing technically how they're officially said. But what are some ways you were saying these names in your head before you found out the real pronunciation?
So the Radch, as I recall, obviously were the Radch, for the vast majority of the time I read.
Absolutely.
The Gerentate, I believe is how I was saying.
Gerentate! That's what I said too! Yeah, that's how I read it in my mind.
Yeah.
There's also the Presker, where the Presger. I don't know why I made it a hard G in my mind, but Presger.
Presger.
Which now that I say it out loud sounds silly, so.
Agreed.
Joke's on me.